George Farquhar, a forgotten hero. The British lion roars along the fatal shores, the Hibernian harp in mournful strains, mixed with the echo of the flood complains, round whose reflecting banks the grieving voice shakes with a trembling noise, as if afraid to tell how the great, martial, godlike Schomberg fell. One of the opening verses of An Ode to General Schomberg, killed at the Boyne, written by a young man of Londonderry, who saw William's commander-in-chief fall at the Battle of the Boyne in July 1690. Having been already present in the city during the siege of 1689, George Farquhar, at the tender age of 12, had followed the example of the city's governor, George Walker, and embarked on the long road south to the Boyne. It is probably more to do with the destruction and pillaging of his family home by James's army in retreat, leading to the death of his father from grief, that led to his decision to follow. But the young man, who was a scholar at the Free Grammar School, now known as Foyle and Londonderry College, demonstrates from a young age his commitment and loyalty to the crown. Born into a family which had been producing clergymen in Ireland since as far back as 1633, it looked like Farquhar too would be heading in the same direction. After returning from the adventures of the Boyne, he continued to study at the grammar school before entering Trinity College in July 1694 at the age of 17, when he joined as a sizer, a student who receives financial assistance from the university in return for menial duties. A good student with a family tradition and reputation to uphold must have brought its own pressures, especially with the distractions and pleasures that Dublin would have offered a young man arriving there. With his older brother Peyton, who had been resident in the city since 1690 working as a stationer, he would have had a ready-made guide to all the delights and distractions of the town. Having sampled many of these distractions, the one that proved the most engaging for George turned out to be Smock Alley Theatre, where his town-haunting activities had invariably led him to its doors, and many occasions for an evening of theatre, being as it was demoralisingly close to Trinity. "They love the play," wailed Archbishop King of Dublin, "better than they love the study." And George was no exception. Few, though even George himself, would have predicted at this point where his fascination would eventually lead to. That, of course, being that he would become one of the most celebrated voices in Restoration theatre, with a reputation and a body of work which endures today. It isn't known for certain when Farquhar dropped out of Trinity, but his name no longer appears on the college register after February 1696, when he would have been 19. A growing friendship with the leading actor of the day, Robert Wilkes, led to an introduction to Joseph Ashbury, the manager of Smock Alley. Trinity was not known as a ready supply chain for actors, and Ashbury took to the notion that it would be a pleasant change to have an actor in the company who knew a thing or two. He resolved to take Farquhar on and fixed on paying him the handsome fee of £1 a week. His first outing for Smock Alley was a daunting one, as the titular character in Shakespeare's Othello, which many would say was quite a weight to burden a young actor with. Although Farquhar displayed a pleasing personality, his gestures natural and his cadences fell upon the right words, he suffered badly from stage fright, and his thin voice did little to convey the performance required, and George's next outing turned out to be playing the more minor role of Lennox in Macbeth. It was the following year that Farquhar would realise for certain that his direction in theatre was not necessarily going to be in front of an audience. During a scene in a production of Dryden's The Indian Emperor, George was supposed to exchange a sword for a foil with which to conduct a fight scene, but forgot. As the curtain rattled down to cover the unscripted scene of carnage on the stage, George swore that he would never act again as he stood helplessly looking down on one of his fellow actors writhing in agony, having just been run through. Despite the recovery of Price some weeks later, George held to his promise and decided to quit Dublin and head for London and seek his fortune there. Once again, family was on hand to help George find his feet in a new city, as he had a sister living in Chelsea, and she was able to house him until he got his bearings. His education at Londonderry and Dublin had given him the capacity for literature, and his time at Smock Alley had given him a practical schooling in the stage. Few could boast that experience, and he was still under 20 years of age. It would be fair to say that Farquhar was in awe of the city, but took to it quickly. Reserves that he had received by way of a benefit from Smock Alley and a personal donation from Robert Wilkes lasted about a year. But by the end of 1698, it would be fair to assume that he was beginning to struggle financially. It was Farquhar who coined the phrase necessity, the mother of invention. And in the practical example of this sentiment, he wrote a short novella entitled Adventures of Covent Garden, which was published in December 1698. In the novella we meet Peregrine, the devilish young beau, a character we would meet again throughout Farquhar's work, and a character that has given many scholars the impression that there was more than a degree of autobiography to it. This was further evidenced when Farquhar's first play opened at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, again in December 1698, with its central character Roebuck having recently arrived from Ireland to make his fortune. As it would turn out, Roebuck, like George, was also seeking to escape the circumstances of his previous life. In this first play, another theme that he would return to continuously for comedy gold was the battle of the sexes. A battle that was not confined to the upper classes, but as with life imitating art, the battle is waged from the lowliest beggar to the highest king. In this reading from Love in a Bottle, we see the weary landlady Bullfinch seek to extract her due rent from the impoverished writer Lyric, who lodges in her garret.
Two as good lines as ever were written. By God, I shall maul these topping fellows. Says Mr. Lee, let there be not one glimpse, one starry spark, but gods meet gods and jostle in the dark. Says little Lyric, let all the lights be burnt out to a snuff, and gods meet gods and play at blind man's buff. Very well, let gods meet gods and so fall out and cuff. Ha! That's much mended. They're as noble lines as ever were penned. Oh, here comes my damn muse. I'm always in the humour of writing elegy after a little of her inspiration.
Mr. Lyric, what do you mean by all this here? You have lodged 2 years in my house, promised me 18 pence a week for your lodging, and I have now received 18 farthings, not the value of that, Mr. Lyric. You always put me off with telling me of your play. Sir, you shall play with me no more. I am in earnest.
This living on love is the dearest lodging. A man's eternally dunned, though perhaps he have less of one ready coin than t'other. There's more trouble in a play than you imagine, madam.
There's more trouble with a lodger than you think, Mr. Lyric.
But at first there's a decorum of time.
Which you never observe, for you keep the worst hours of any lodger in London town.
Then there's the exactness of characters.
And you have the most scandalous one I ever heard.
Then there's the laying the drama.
Then you find my napkins and tiles.
But then there are the preparations of incidents, working the passions. Oh, beauty of expression, closeness of plot, justice of place, turn of language, opening the catastrophe.
Then you wear out my sheets, burn my fire and candle, dirty my house, eat my meat, destroy my drink, wear out my furniture. I have lent you money out of my pocket.
Was ever poor rogue so ridden? If ever the muses had a horse, I am he. Poor madam, Pegasus is jaded.
As with Lyric, it might be said that George was a little jaded by this time, and by the middle of 1699, despite a moderately good run of Love in a Bottle, George's reserves would have been running low again, and pressure would have been on to deliver something new. And deliver he did. In November 1699, Farquhar opened The Constant Couple, once again at the Theatre Royal. In a world where 3 to 6 performances would be considered a successful run, The Constant Couple went on to be staged 53 times in London and a further 23 performances in Dublin during its first season. The triumph set Farquhar on his way, but perhaps not quite to the extent that it should have. His subjects, while speaking to the public, and doubtless to the pleasure of Christopher Rich, the manager at Drury Lane, gained faint praise from his peers. Farquhar was an outsider, and that sense of alienation that he probably felt his entire life would plague him in London as well. The expectation of comradeship he thought would have been due in the nation's capital as a loyal Briton who served the throne on the battlefield was not forthcoming. Perhaps the gentle and naive Irishman, still only 22, had yet to develop the hard edges he required to survive in the cutthroat world of London theatre. The pressure was now on Farquhar again. This time, though, it was not to follow his breakthrough, but to build on this quite unparalleled success, a much harder act to follow. And so it proved, and it would appear that his muse had deserted him, as between 1701 and 1705, Farquhar wrote 3 more plays, The Twin Rivals, The Inconstant, and Sir Harry Wildair, a poor sequel to The Constant Couple, which was being perpetually revived, providing the writer with uncomfortable hearkening back to past glories, despite the financial benefit it brought. These revivals only serving to taunt the young playwright that perhaps his best days were indeed behind him. This would have been a sentiment that he may have ascribed to as his return to the army in a more formal capacity beckoned in 1704. Farquhar was commissioned to the Earl of Orrery's regiment, and after serving in the Netherlands, he became a recruiting sergeant, and it was this experience that led to his next breakthrough on the stage. The recruiting officer opened at the Queen's Theatre in the Haymarket on the 8th of March 1706. It was the usual Farquhar fare, an overbearing establishment, shrewd middlemen, clever women, dub-founded beaux. The themes of love, money, reputation and honour, all mixed in with the realism which owed to an observant eye on human nature, give the play its wit, its appeal and its authenticity. Farquhar was never frightened to poke fun at his perceived betters, and he ridicules the pomposity of certain characters, as in this next scene. Justice Balance introduces Mr. Worthy to Captain Brazen, a recruiting officer, although not the one of the title, thus permitting Captain Brazen to be the architect of his own downfall.
Who's that bluff fellow in the sash? I don't know him.
But I engage he knows you, and everybody at first sight. His impudence were prodigy, were not his ignorance proportionable. He has the most universal acquaintance of any man living. For he won't be alone, and nobody will keep company with him twice. And then he's a Caesar among the women. Veni, vidi, vici, that's all. If he had talked with the maid, and he swears he has lain with the mistress. But the most surprising part of his character is his memory, which is the most prodigious and the most trifling in the world.
I've met with such men, and I take this good-for-nothing memory to proceed from a certain contexture of the brain, which is purely adapted to impertinencies. And then they lodge secure, they're only having no thoughts of his own to disturb them.
This is your man, sir. Add but the traveller's privilege of lying, and even that he abuses. This is the picture.
Mr. Worthy, I am your servant, and so forth.
My dear, whispering, sir, in good company is not manners, and when nobody's by, 'tis foolish.
Company? More de l'ami, I beg the gentleman's pardon. Who is he?
We'll ask him.
So I will. My dear, I'm your servant, and so forth. Your name, my dear?
Very laconic, sir.
Laconic. A very good name, truly. I have known several laconics abroad. Poor Jack Laconic, he was killed at the Battle of Landen. I remember that he had a blue ribbon in his hat that very day, and after he fell, they found a piece of neat's tongue in his pocket.
Pray, sir, did the French attack us or we them at Landen?
The French attack us? Sir, are you a Jacobite?
Why that question?
Because none but a Jacobite could think the French durst attack us first. No, sir. We attacked them on them. And I have reason to remember the time, for I had 22 horses killed under me that day.
And sir, you rid mighty hard.
Or perhaps, sir, like my countrymen, you rid upon 6 horses at once.
What do you mean, gentlemen? I tell you that they were killed, all torn to pieces by cannon shot, except 6 that I had stacked to death upon the enemy's Chavreau de Frise.
Noble captain, may I crave your name?
Brazen, at your service.
Oh, Brazen. A very good name. I have known several of the Brazens abroad.
Do you know Captain Plume, sir?
Is he anything related to Frank Plume in Northamptonshire? Honest Frank? Oh, many a dry bottle have we cracked hand to fist. You must have known his brother Charles, who was engaged in the India Company. He married the daughter of old Tongue Pad, the master in Chancery. A very pretty woman, only squinted a little. She died in childbed of her first child, but the child survived, was a daughter, and whether 'twas called Margaret or Marjorie, upon my soul, I can't remember. But gentlemen, I must meet a lady, a £1,000 presently upon the walk upon the water. Worthy, your servant, laconic.
Farquhar had once more found his form, and aside from 21 performances in the first year of the play, it was published 3 times in the first 7 months. Despite this success, something is not right, and during the second run of The Recruiting Officer in the autumn, Farquhar goes missing. His friend and mentor Robert Wilkes, used to meeting George after performance, hasn't seen him and can't find him for 2 months. Eventually the word comes to him that Farquhar is not to be found in his lodgings on the south side of the Strand, but rather in a cold and damp garret room in St Martin's Lane on the less fashionable north side of the Strand. When Wilkes eventually locates him, he finds Farquhar teetering on the edge of collapse. Despite the success of The Recruiting Officer, he is penniless, in a most miserable situation, and deeply anxious that he has offended the Earl of Orrery for selling his commission in the Earl's regiment. Wilkes convinces him to put these troubles out of his mind and capitalise on his success as a way of breathing life back into his friend and restore his mood and fortune. Throughout the winter, Farquhar strove to complete his 7th full-length play, and on the 8th of March 1707, the work for which he is most remembered, The Beau Stratagem, opened at the Queen's Theatre. Once more set outside the confines of London, Farquhar once again brings the country to the town in all its glory. 2 con men arrive at a coach house run by highwaymen. Add to this the dissatisfied wife of a drunkard husband brought to the country from the town, and the point is made about unhappy marriages being ripe for divorce. Again, Farquhar's own life finding space in the plot of his play. Throw in a French officer, an Irish priest, a headstrong barmaid, and servants who seek to please themselves, and in the hands of Farquhar, the result is the finest comedy of the Restoration style. This final scene once more shows the battle of the sexes and how Farquhar treats the women of his plays, not just as plot devices, but once more allows them to be a full and integral member of his work, to maximise comedy effect, of course.
Morrow, my dear sister, are you for church this morning?
Oh, anywhere to pray, for heaven alone can help me. But I think, Dorinda, there's no form of prayer in the liturgy against bad husbands.
But there's a form of law in Doctor's Commons, and I swear, Sister Sullen, rather than see you thus continually discontented, I would advise you apply to that. For besides the part that I bear in your vexatious broils as being sister to the husband and friend to the wife, your example gives me such an impression of matrimony that I shall be apt to condemn my person to a long vacation all its life. But supposing, madam, that you brought it to a case of separation, what can you urge against your husband? My brother is, first, the most constant man alive.
The most constant husband, I grant you.
He never sleeps from you.
No, he always sleeps with me.
He allows you a maintenance suitable to your quality.
A maintenance? Do you take me, madam, for an hospital child, that I must sit down and bless my benefactors for meat, drink, and clothes? As I take it, madam, I brought your brother £10,000, out of which I might expect some pretty things called pleasures.
You share in all the pleasures the country affords.
Country pleasures? Racks and torments. Dost think, child, that my limbs were made for the leaping of ditches and clambering over stiles, or that my parents, wisely foreseeing my future happiness in country pleasures, had early instructed me in the rural accomplishments of drinking fat ale, playing at whisk, and smoking tobacco with my husband? Or of the spreading of plasters, brewing of diet drinks, and stilling rosemary water with the good old gentlewoman, my mother-in-law?
I'm sorry, madam, that it is not more in our power to divert you. I could wish, indeed, that our entertainments were a little more polite, or your taste a little less refined.
Come, Dorinda, don't be angry. He's my husband and your brother, and between both, is he not a sad brute?
I have nothing to say to your part of him. You're the best judge.
Oh, sister, if ever you marry, beware of a sullen, silent sot, one that always muses but never thinks. There's some diversion in a talking blockhead, and since a woman must wear chains, I would have the pleasure of hearing him rattle a little. Now you shall see, but take this by the way. He came home this morning at his usual hour of 4, wakened me out of a sweet dream of something else by tumbling over the tea table, which he broke all to pieces. After his man and he had rolled about the room like sick passengers in a storm, he comes flats into bed, dead as a salmon into a fishmonger's basket. His feet cold as ice, his breath hot as a furnace, and his hands and his feet as greasy as his flannel nightcap. Oh, matrimony! He tosses up the clothes with a barber's swing over his shoulders, disorders the whole economy of my bed, leaves me half naked, and my whole night's comfort is the tunable serenade of that wakeful nightingale, his nose. Oh, the pleasure of counting the melancholy clock by a snoring husband. But now, sister, you shall see how handsomely, being a well-bred man, he will beg my pardon.
My head aches consumedly.
Will you be pleased, my dear, to drink tea with us this morning? It may do your head good.
No.
Coffee, brother?
Pshaw!
Will you please to dress and go to church with me? The air may help you.
Scrub! Sir, what day of the week is it?
Sunday, ain't please your worship.
Sunday. Bring me a dram, do you hear? And set out the venison pasty and a tankard of strong beer upon the hall table. I'll go to breakfast.
Oh, stay, brother. You shan't get off so. You were very naught last night, and must make your wife reparation. Come, brother, won't you ask pardon?
For what?
For being drunk last night.
I can afford it, can't I?
But I can't, sir.
Then you may let it alone.
But I must tell you, sir, that this is not to be borne.
And I'm glad on't.
What is the reason, sir, that you use me thus inhumanely?
Scrub! Sir, get things ready to shave my head.
Have a care of coming near his temple, Scrub, for fear you meet something there that may turn the edge of your razor.
The boy defender from Londonderry's influence, though, has been felt over the centuries as a literary great. A performance of the Bow Stratagem in 1783 in Florida is the first recorded play in that state of America. Not to be left out, The Recruiting Officer was the first play to be staged in Australia in 1789. He has been adapted and referenced by writers such as Bertolt Brecht and Alexander Pope, as well as for television and radio audiences. His plays still form part of the repertoire of established companies, from the Royal Court to the Donmar Warehouse, and the National Theatre of Ireland at the Abbey to the Royal National Theatre. Not bad for a wee lad from Londonderry with his 343rd birthday coming up. A foot soldier in some ways, but a general in the field of culture and heritage. It's time to rediscover George Farquhar, a forgotten hero.